Anthony Grayling, do you understand the Prime Minister's position where she says, well, look, I do want to do this, but surely my role as Prime Minister is to protect the interests of UK citizens who live in the other EU member states, and until we get agreement from them to do that, I can't give this guarantee to EU nationals living here?
Well, it's a very difficult business for people, both our own UK citizens living in the EU citizens living here, and as Jacob says, for a very long time in some cases, not knowing what the future is and being uncertain and not getting any assurances. Interesting to hear that assurance. Indeed, you went quite far there. You talked about all our rights being preserved. Well, that's an interesting concept. Perhaps right of free movement would be among them. But, of course, the EU campaign itself and what's happened since, and the way that the Article 50 bill has gone through, is altogether very unlikely to be reassuring to people. And I've got staff and students who are very worried and are thinking about going back, not waiting to see what's going to happen, keeping up a commitment here, working on a business here, perhaps thinking of investing here, with an uncertain future ahead of them.
When you've listened to the tone of this debate, and I mean we can go back to the beginning of the referendum debate, Claire Perry in the debate this week likened people like Jacob to jihadis. I mean she said she was frustrated by the debate becoming hysterical, and then called people jihadis, which I did think was quite amusing. But do you think she's got a point there?
Well, I do, because of course the people on the Eurosceptic wing have for a very, very long time been plotting, working away, making life extremely uncomfortable for one Conservative Prime Minister after another, finally getting an EU referendum, for which there was absolutely no necessity other than internal Conservative Party politics, and we found ourselves now in this position as a result, I have to say, of what can only be really described as a massive cons being played on the British people. And there are so many aspects of it which are worrying. The total ignoring of opinion in Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Irish situation, the people of Gibraltar, the nearly half of people who voted in the referendum who want to remain in the EU. I mean, so cavalier, driving this through. It's really been like a tank being driven through people's...
But it was a bill with a specific purpose. It was only 132 words long. It was just to trigger Article 50. If they hadn't done that, what would the 52% think?
Well, I mean, the question arises really who the 52% are. We know that they are, in fact, 37% of a restricted electorate. So this idea that the will of the people was expressed in the EU referendum is a kind of cant phrase.
On the people that actually voted, can't you?
No, I don't think you can. I think you can ask questions about why 16, 17-year-olds didn't have the vote, and a whole tranche of expatriates and EU citizens living here who have a very material interest in the future of the UK and its relationship to Europe. All those groups of people, by the way, had the vote in the Scottish independence referendum. Why not here?
Jihadi Jacob, let's come back to you on that. I mean, a lot of points there that Anthony Grayling made. Presumably, I mean, you were very mute in that. I thought you might interrupt him, but you clearly disagree with everything he's just said.
Oh, yes, I do. But first of all, Claire Perry, I think is absolutely marvellous. She is one of the best and most outspoken members of Parliament and has a wonderfully colourful turn of phrase. But I shall not start wearing a burqa or any other equivalent jihadi kit. It was an absolutely proper democratic vote according to the norms of our democracy, that 16-year-olds do not have votes in general elections. It would have been perverse to give it to them in a referendum.
It's not a general election, it was a referendum, and they have very material interest in the outcome.
People who want to cheat want to change the franchise to suit their own book. We have a very clear franchise in elections, and it is 18 plus.
But in the Scottish referendum, 16 and 17-year-olds had the vote, and they actually played a very big part in the debate.
The SNP altered the franchise to suit their own book. Everybody knows that.
Well, it didn't work, did it?
It didn't work. But actually, I think fiddling the franchise to suit your book is fundamentally undemocratic. To have suddenly changed a system of voting that we have had in this country for a long period, I think 18-year-olds got the vote in the late 1960s, would have been simply a fiddle. And the British people are fed up with being fiddled in favour of the pro-European cause. They had a fair open election. They voted to leave. And this stuff about it's only 37%, you would never get a majority in any election in this country if you assumed that all the people who didn't vote were of the other view.
And that's
it's a bizarre
exactly the
way
problem,
of carrying on.
May I say? I mean, I think the people who live in the Westminster bubble and MPs themselves who very frequently get voted into Parliament on this kind of minority, and who don't want to change the system because they think it might not be to their benefit if they did, have got used to the idea that 37% of the electorate is enough, and it isn't. And this wasn't a general election. In a general election, you can change your mind in 4 or 5 years' time, and you can chuck out the people you've made the mistake of putting in. But if you have a referendum, this is a very, very major, and this particular one with a huge constitutional implication.
And it had a very high turnout because people took it so seriously. It was a really positive result. Lots of engagement. Lots of people registered to vote at the last minute because they wanted to have their say. They had it, and they said leave.
And they wanted £350 million a week to go to the NHS. How serious was the Leave campaign?
And George Osborne wanted a punishment budget. What happened to that? The argument put by the Leave campaigners was a very good, honest argument, and it won.
It was an absolute.
It was more honest than the argument put by the Remain campaign.
May I ask you this? May I ask you this? You call it an honest campaign. Yeah. You want to brush aside the 350 million thing, which the people who put that advertisement together have now themselves confessed won the campaign, and it was a big lie. This whole business about sovereignty and returning sovereignty. 2 points that I'd like Mr. Mogg to address, if I may, please. One is this: the idea that we can hustle the country out of the EU on the outcome of that referendum. Restricted franchise, 37%, not enough, by the way, for a strike in a public service.
Well, to be fair, the government did say in that leaflet, we will implement what you decide.
Well, a government leaflet is not Parliament. Parliament is meant to be sovereign in this matter, and that was my second point, that what we've seen this week is the whips at work. You know, we talk about having a sovereign parliament, and we don't. We have a sovereign executive, which, if it wants to get a bill through, can whip the lobby fodder through the lobbies and have a disgraceful outcome of the kind that we've had this week.
Much more to discuss in just a moment. We
just
have
2 words, sour grapes.
This is Ian Dale's Brexit Briefing on LBC.
Anthony, you were just accused of sour grapes.
Yes, indeed. Really, I should be accused rather of determination. Because I've got bad news for the Brexiters. The bad news is this. Brexit isn't a done deal yet. There's still a very, very long way to go. A lot of hurdles for them to jump, at any one of which they might fall. Somebody once memorably said that a week is a long time in politics. There's going to be many years before all the difficulties and complexities of this are sorted out. But if it happens that the UK does exit the EU, that will be the day in which a very, very determined campaign to get it back into the EU begins. So this is a long-drawn story, and the further future, the long-term future of the UK is most emphatically in the EU. So it's not a question of us having sour grapes, it's a question of them doing a little bit of bloating. But you know what they say about who has the last laugh.
You don't seriously think, though, that in your lifetime, my lifetime, Jacob's lifetime, even the lifetime of Jacob's children, that we will be back in the EU?
Oh, I do. I'm very confident about that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The British people have voted to leave. The House of Commons has voted to leave. Professor Grayling wants us to stay. I'm with the majority.
May I? Because this phrase, the British people, I do think it's the most terrific catchphrase. We're really talking about a quarter of the population when you sum up who that 37% of the restricted franchise was.
Well, I think this is such nonsense. The figure gets lower and lower for Professor Grayling's convenience. But the British people voted in a fair election, and a majority voted to leave.
A minority
I think to call
of them
them the British people is extremely fair.
A minority of them did, and I have to say, with very great respect, that to see an old Etonian stockbroker on the far right of the Tory party representing himself as a tribune of the people, representing the interests of car workers in Sunderland, is mildly implausible.
Are you being Etonist?
What I want to say is that this referendum was for...
the professor of the New College of the Humanities or I should throw stones at each other about our backgrounds.
Well,
particularly.
Let me say this, that it's not the people that Mr. Rees-Mogg is representing. representing, it's his people. Because the kind of Britain that he wants, a low-tax Britain, a Britain where there isn't enough money for the NHS and for state education and for welfare and for environmental protection.
If we don't give it to the EU.
Well, you want to privatise it. I mean, you don't use it, so you want to privatise it.
Privatise the NHS. I've never argued for the privatisation of the NHS. You're putting words into my mouth.
Let me put some other words into your mouth that you do, which is that you don't like environmental regulations, which the EU has cleaned up our rivers and our coasts.
Hold on. Just one thing on EU regulation.
Just on that. Back in November, Anthony, you retweeted an article that Jacob had written. Headline was, "Britain could slash environmental and safety standards a very long way after Brexit." You called Jacob irresponsible and a fool. Do you really want to slash environmental and safety standards?
What I was talking about then was whether Indian manufacturing standards would be good enough to import from India. But look at what the EU has done with regard to diesel engines. Because we've had diesel engines, because we were worried about environment standards to cut carbon dioxide under EU targets, we have killed people. We have poisoned them because diesel engines have been chucking out particulates that have got into people's lungs because the EU was fussing about carbon dioxide. Of course I want to get rid of environmental standards that kill people.
Let's move on to the House of Lords, because obviously the bill is the Article 50 bill is now going to the House of Lords. It's probably going to have a more difficult passage there. Do you agree with your colleague Sir Oliver Letwin, who says that if the Lords voted this down in any way, they should be abolished?
I think the Lords is not going to do that. I mean, I think that
but if it did,
Baroness Smith of Basildon is an extremely sensible lady. I think her comments have been very helpful.
She's the leader of Labour.
She's the leader of Labour in the House of Lords. I was on a committee with her, and she's a very impressive person. I think she understands the sensitivity of this, and that the Lords does not want to get into a 1909 peers against the people situation. So I'd be really, really surprised if it got there. Oliver Letwin is a great man and a wonderful thinker, but sometimes his thoughts are beyond where we need to go.
Anthony, what would your advice to their lordships be?
Well, some people are saying, I'm not quite sure that I agree with this, that the Lords' days are numbered anyway. They might as well go down in a blaze of glory. That is what some people are saying. But I don't think that. I think the Lords is a very sensible place with some very sensible ideas. And one sensible idea, which I heard mooted there this morning, in fact, visiting somebody, was you wouldn't hope to buy a house and pay for it and move into it before you had a surveyor's report on it. And if the surveyor's report turned out to be that the house was teetering over and had very bad foundations, you would want an opportunity to get out. So I think a very key thing that the Lords might do is to put in an amendment which says there has to be another referendum on the terms of the deal, in which one option is to remain in the EU.
Well, that's what the Liberal Democrats did in the Commons. They got 33 votes.
Well, we don't have a sovereign House of Commons. We have a whipped House of Commons, so it doesn't mean anything any longer.
The House of Commons is sovereign. People don't have to obey the whip, as I know only too well. I've broken it once or twice. But we've had the survey. We've had the survey over nearly 50 years, and the surveyor's come back. He said the EU is rotten, it's undemocratic, and the British people have voted to get us out. God bless the British people.
On the contrary, the EU has been a huge benefit to us. It's been an enormous benefit to us and our partners in Europe. And also the other thing that worries me about the Brexiters, again, with great respect, they don't seem to have done any serious thinking.
Great respect is the most bogus term in the English language.
Quite right. Quite right. Fully intended. But I mean, here is a serious point. The United Kingdom and its EU partners over the last 4 decades have been constructing together a great interrelated economic legal framework in which free trade and movement of people and capital, goods, services and the like have been possible. Even those parts of the EU which have experienced problems, and in a huge idealistic project like the EU expect problems. But it's what the result of that great endeavour has been this, that we are all like a Siamese twin now, joined at the brain. And to separate us is going to take a very long time, a great deal of delicate work, and it's going to do a great deal of damage.
One word answer. How pathetic has Labour been on Article 50?
Extremely.
Troubled.